It's also testing against 2 browsers locales and 4 brands. So I'm actually going to run this from the command line. And the nice thing is this executes nicely through Maven. Now the nice part about Maven is that we can, right now, this parallelization that we're doing is only at the class level, meaning that we're only parallelizing these combinations across this one class. But using the Surefire plugin, it's actually pretty easy to add configuration to it, saying I also want to run X number of classes in parallel. So what's happening there at the start of our test is we log out a link to the sauce labs so that a tester who is running through this test and wants to look and see what went wrong in the process, they can click through those links. Those links also show up in the exceptions that are generated. And then the logger adds to the end of the class name the combination that we're currently testing. So this Sauce Connect test, Firefox 16 Vista in English, running against Holiday Inn, for example. So I'm just going to copy that link to show you what that looks like. Well, I can actually go up over here. So those are those 4 tests running in Sauce Labs now. Now the framework we use for this is Parallel Web Test. And Parallel Web Test is actually an open source framework that we developed at Dynacron Group. It's on GitHub. You can feel free to check it out, steal the code, offer us improvements. Would love that. And there are parts of the Parallel Web Test framework that already handle firing up the Sauce Labs without having to provide a lot of description. We just use an environment variable to set the credentials that you use for connecting to Sauce Labs. And we also handle logging out into the browser. Here, these log messages that tell us when a test method is starting and finishing, so that if we do execute multiple test methods in a single class, then we can easily see when those test methods start and stop inside of this browser log. So that if we do reuse a browser, it's still easy for us to separate out the individual test methods in that single browser use. So that's kind of the finished product side of it. If you wanted to change this test so that we use a different combination strategy, for example, if we were trying to find a defect that was running that would only show up in a single paired combination, like here, then all we have to do is change the configuration value. Nothing like waiting for a class to load. Right, so this time we have 16 tests run, still 0 failures. This is again the really one of the nice things about Sauce Labs is that all the computational difficulty for executing these tests, all the real strain on the system is mostly happening not on my computer. It's all happening out in the cloud on each one of those VMs. All the real work is firing up the browsers, running the JavaScript engines, those pieces. The JUnit side is actually very light. So it makes it easy on the IT infrastructure, especially if you're running this on a CI server, where you don't want to have a very heavyweight set of tests running. You don't want to have a set of test slaves that have to have certain browsers installed on them, for example.
Are you testing against the publicly facing instance, or is it like a Sauce Connect tunnel?
This one is actually, I think, is using a Sauce Connect tunnel. Yeah. So that's kind of a quick description of the kind of testing we've been doing using parallelization and parameter combinations. Now, you already mentioned a few possible places where you could definitely improve on this. One of them is that it'd be great if we could find a way to remember test combinations in between test executions. There's no easy way to do this, however, inside of JUnit, because each one of these tests are really atomic. The results are, if we're running this in Maven, they're going to be stored to the target directory, and they're kind of done. Possible way might be integration with Sonar, for example. The next thing is finding a way to effectively display these test combinations after a run. Like right now, when we run this test, we can see in the logs what test methods are executed, but there's no easy way to audit to see which combinations were executed. You just got to kind of rely on the randomization and the programming in order to figure out which, in order to believe that the testing coverage is sufficient. And we'd like to, right now it uses a customized parameterized runner, and using any kind of custom code in a testing framework I am loath to do, because that means that one has to maintain it, and that new people who come on, they have to figure out a way to understand it. That's a weakness of any testing system, so we'd like to convert it back to use as much of the newer JUnit parameterized runner as possible. So, at this point, are there any questions on the framework? And here are some, by the way, some links to some of the libraries that were used. If you got, go ahead.
You were mentioning that you keep track to see if the browser's still responsive, and after so many times of it not being responsive, you then stop testing that path or that combination. I'm curious as to how you dynamically decide to skip tests. Is that how you do it? How are you approaching stopping the test flow once you're in it?
Well, the moment it's dirty, it throws an exception. It fails a test.
Okay.
So once we detect that the server is down, which happens not infrequently, and this might happen because your application server is down, maybe it happened because communication to the server has broken down. There are different possibilities, but in each one of these possibilities, you don't want to keep firing up tests and waiting for them to time out. Because that's expensive, and as a consultant, I don't like having the QA manager show up and say, why did we spend X number of hours last night testing our down server? So what it'll actually do is fail on initialization of the browser.
So is it because you said you're storing the browser's accessibility through something else? I forgot what it was. How do you know when you got your test classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
At the test class, it knows whether past ones have failed? Is that what it is, or?
That's right. We track, actually, in between tests, there's a JUnit rule that just does a dead browser check.
Okay.
And what it does is it tries to hit a URL. It actually doesn't try to hit any URL. It just tries to get the URL from the driver at that moment. And if the driver doesn't respond, then it says this browser is dead.
Okay.
Because one would assume that the browser still had a URL. Yeah?
So why didn't you just proactively ping the site whether to see if it's up or down before you start testing?
Proactively ping the site whether it's up or down before you start testing.
If you ping the site and it's down, why bother testing?
That's an interesting idea. I like that. Well, it's because it's not as simple as a ping, actually. Now that I take another 3 seconds. Okay. What we usually found is that it's not that the site is down. It may respond with a 200. It may respond in some fashion, but it may be that some dependency of the site may be down. For instance, the site that we're testing here actually has a lot of back-end dependencies, including a big mainframe. If the connection to that mainframe in our QAP in the test environment is down, then the site itself looks like it's up until you try to do anything interesting. And that's when you'll run into just, spinning JavaScript.
So I wanted to see that you guys have tests and you form the same test obviously with different browser combinations and locale, whatever, right? Why don't you run all the tests on one browser and then run all the same tests on a different browser? We'll parallelize the test across the same browsers so they can let those browsers finish up first earlier instead of having to wait for the rest of the browsers to do that?
That's
You're paralyzing in one direction, but where you spend a lot of time just waiting for browsers to finish.
right. You're right. This test framework is always going to take as long as the slowest browser,
Yes.
even though they are running all at the same time.
Yes. So rather than doing that, remove all that wait and just test all the tests parallelize against one browser, and then just move over to browser combinations and run the test that way.
Because we run them in parallel, then we only have to wait for the slowest browser instead of the combination of the time for all browsers. Which if we were looping over the browsers, we'd have them all end to end. Now, you could, with each one of those browsers, you could extend the parallelization across them. So you could be still using the same amount of concurrency, and you could probably get a little more speed that way. This way makes it a bit easier for it actually to be understood by Maven and JUnit. One of the ways we've thought about working around this is use different Maven profiles for different browsers. So that,
How many tests do you have?
well, the number of tests is constantly growing.
So I would imagine that if you are willing to throw money at it, right? The other way it would give you a lot faster testing time because you can literally parallelize all your tests at once, and it'll be the long. It only take us long as the longest test run. I guess for that project.
And that's true, but we do have concurrency limits. So early on actually, when we were working with Sauce Labs, we actually parallelized out wildly. Like we would have as many as 200 simultaneous browsers connecting. But we have to be good partners, and that definitely there are limits to the amount of concurrency that each customer is allowed. Because that amount of burst traffic across lots and lots of virtual machines, that's painful on the other side.
Also, are you testing against the production server or just testing against the QA server testing server?
We prefer to test against QA server.
Yeah, that's all my server have concurrency limitation to you have 100 can connect to one server,
Yeah.
one single machine.
That's actually the other side of that, which is a good point. 200 simultaneous browsers may not be supportable in your test environment.
We're planning to test it.
Right. So we don't want to accidentally do load tests on our QA server and make that a factor in our tests. As fun as that is for instance, where I'm currently testing a Nintendo, for example, our production servers may be, a giant mainframe in the basement, but the test server that we're allowed may be a small VM. They have very, very different performance profiles. And especially with Selenium tests, you'll notice that the Selenium tests become very sensitive to timing issues. So a little bit of slowdown may cause lots and lots of additional failures and lots more of a maintenance headache. We all know how to, I'm assuming you've all had plenty of meetups about the difference between explicit and implicit waits and how you manage that waiting time. But it's definitely not a fun task sussing out all of those latency issues. Yeah?
Have you considered using SNG? So, what was the trade-off? Why you use JUnit?
Why we use JUnit? Mostly, we like to use whatever frameworks are most likely to be used already by our clients. JUnit just has a lot more popularity, a lot more penetration. So if we come in and say we want to use a different testing framework that has a better suite description, as I understand it from TestNG, although it may have some features that we would like, we try to keep it as close as possible to what our clients are using and to what developers are using, because I also don't want to have the entire burden of maintaining my tests. That's also, as much, I just finished writing a suite of smoke tests, for example, in Ruby, which I found fun, easy, but getting someone else on my team to maintain them or look at what went wrong whenever that test went bad is a nightmare, because they're all Java developers, they don't care. But that's extraneous to the technical problem. There are always there's always a field of other problems besides just the tech. Yeah.
Are you using CI systems like Hudson or Jenkins to run your tests overnight?
We try to use our CI system so that they test every single commit. And we use Jenkins or TeamCity, whatever they have. I prefer TeamCity because I like doing pre-test commits, for example, which is not, as far as I know, supported by Jenkins. Jenkins is nicer because it's open source, but it's also, in my experience, slightly less reliable.
Get what you pay for.
Yeah, well, yes, you do get what you pay for. But as you can see, I'm a fan of IntelliJ products from my IDE. Yeah.
So if you wanted to actually await the combinations, so for example, you assume that Firefox in English and IE 9 in English are going to be the more popular combinations. Is there a way to do that with your type safe configure? You just repeat entries in order to get it randomized so it picks it up. It has a greater chance of picking it up.
You could repeat entries. I don't have a way of waiting at the moment. because there's not a lot of parent information about these combinations. That's something I'd like to add because, like I said, there's no way to test